I have to give a trigger warning before this video begins. This is going to be the most disturbing thing that I've ever created. We are featuring real interview footage from victims and going down one of the darkest rabbit holes that you could possibly go down on a platform like YouTube. So for all the viewers out there, I really want to inform you that this is going to be a very graphic show, a very disturbing show, and it's going to contain details about horrible things that have happened to younger individuals in society. So I just want to warn you. So today we're talking about a very strong, courageous woman and survivor of the most horrific thing I've ever read about, a woman named Anneke Lucas. So according to OCCRP, Belgium has attracted criticism over the past few decades for its perceived permissiveness towards major child sexual exploitation scandals. In an article by Brussels Times, around 300 to 600 cases are reported each year. A recent Amnesty International survey estimated that 1 in 4 under 19 in the country of Belgium has been a victim of rape, and that 53% of such cases never make it to trial. In the 1990s, with the Marc Dutroux case, which we've talked about a lot on this channel, much of the nation's eyes were brought upon an alleged predator network that ran rampant through Belgium but had been clandestine for many years. A survivor and victim of that group, Anneke Lucas, seemed like any other child growing up. She was part of a regular middle-class Belgian family of 4. She attended church on Sundays, spoke Germanic, lived on a Nordic reservation, had a little brother who was 4 years younger than her, and even went to school during the week. But we can't talk about Anneke Lucas without talking about her sadistic mother. And before we go any further, I want to remind you all, if you want to verify everything I'm talking about in this video, you can visit the resources document in the description. Same if you're listening to this as a podcast. I don't want anything to happen to me in the next weeks or months, so if anything does happen to me, you have at least an idea of where to start looking to find out who did it. And all parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Now, with all that said, let's get into the conspiracy files. So this is a story that I've wanted to cover for a very long time. The videos that Anneke appears in, I've seen so many, different times. I've watched all of them many, many times, and they're stunning and just deeply disturbing. And she's a world famous advocate for the rights of children. As you can probably tell with my content here on this channel, I really want to dig in and expose cases like this because I get this comment all the time. People don't want to believe that this stuff is real. I get criticized for covering this stuff. People say that I'm covering my own tracks and that I'm like evil myself, or I get pleasure out of reading this shit. Couldn't be farther from the truth. I get excited when I get to expose these people using the platform that I've worked my ass off to build for myself over the last 10 years. 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears. Even to this day, you'd think I would work less, but I work more. Like, I work 10-hour days almost every single day of the week, just doing these videos and researching, and my channel and my wife and I's podcast and everything. This stuff comes from a place of passion for the truth, for exposing this stuff. I've had personal experience with the corruption of government. There's nothing more than I hate on planet Earth than the corruption of government, the exploitation of children, and inept, lazy, or corrupt police forces. So stories like this cover all three. You could really help this channel and this show out if you're watching on YouTube by subscribing, leave me a comment, like the video, share the video on your social media. Same if you're listening to this as a podcast, share a link to it on your Instagram story, tweet it out. Just help me spread the word, because all these platforms that this is posted on, they don't want to push this sort of information. So you guys, we have to make this a grassroots thing to get people watching, because this is important stuff. And once you start looking at the world in this way, it changes how you view everything. I do want to say, instead of saying the words that I usually have to censor, I'm trying a new thing so that I don't have to censor myself as much. So if I use stupid sounding words throughout this podcast, I hope you know that I fucking hate that myself, and it is so cringy and dumb. But I would prefer to not have to do bleeping every 20 seconds, and I'd rather just make myself cringe a little bit. Like referring to these criminals that take interest in kids as predators instead of the proper word. So we're going to see how that works out. But without further ado, let's get into Anneke's story. Like we started off by saying, Anneke was a completely normal girl from the outside. She attended church. She had a little brother, went to school during the week. To everyone who saw her, she just seemed like your average 6-year-old girl. But This story is just so dark. But when Anneke was just 6 years old, that's when she started to be sexually exploited by her mother, Sabine Mikkelsen, to a large predator ring in Belgium. But things hadn't just started there. I'm gonna let Anneke explain this herself.
She did start abusing me from birth, and we were alone at first, and then after she was married, I was 4 when she was married, and then at 5, these pimps, this woman started cleaning our house. And a year later, so this woman actually and her husband, they would take me for weekends, they would groom me, they would take me with other children who were not their children. Just around my 6th birthday, they took me for the first time to an orgy. Sometime later, my mother took me herself.
In her memoir, Quest for Love, which I've actually read, Anneke shares that her mother was never diagnosed as mentally ill, and that her mother's emotional life, which motivated her every word and action, was stuck inside an incest triangle, and that's why she exploited her. Anneke's mother told her that her grandparents had been perfect. Yet, when Anneke tried to confront her mother in later years, her mother would scream that Anneke had no idea how bad she had it when she was younger, and when Anneke would ask what happened, her mother would shut down. Anneke's grandmother died weeks before her mother's 6th birthday in 1945. In her memoir, Anneke related that if her mother was a victim of incest, she guessed that any negative feelings towards her grandparents, her mother's own mother, would have been locked away by shame. Anneke also said that her mother's intonations were often those of a 5-year-old girl. And while she only ever uttered praise about Anneke's grandma, all other women received only criticism from her behind their backs. As for Anneke, her mother viewed her in a very black and white method of thinking, going from seeing Anneke as evil and all-powerful and a bland receptacle for the little girl part in her who carried the blame for her own experience of abuse. Anneke recalled several memories of her toxic mother throughout her childhood in her memoir. In one, Anneke remembered coming home to her mama to a lady at their home. Anneke described how nice her mom was to the lady there, who had met Anneke before and later revealed she worked for the network as a pimp. And during this meeting, her mother became angry at Anneke, criticizing her for correcting her in front of their guest. Anneke later asked for a bag of chips long after her little brother had gone to bed, and her mother mocked her, saying, "Well, don't get up and get it yourself." At this point, as she had already been involved in sex trafficking, Anneke shifted into survival mode and turned into the person that she was when she was at these network events and ordered her mother to get her more to drink. Her mom punished Anneke by taking her back up to one of the network's primary castles. During the winter of 1973, after Anneke and her mother went Christmas shopping and had lunch one day, Anneke found herself in her mother's hold. Something she had done pissed her off, but she wasn't sure what. Anneke suspected that her mother was jealous of her over something. "We're going now to the Djarjak's manor," her mom informed her after dinner, but Anneke begged her to stay home, not wanting to visit the manor. The Djarjak family was a family that Anneke and her mother knew well. Their children were also involved in this predator network, and they'd often host events during which Anneke worked, if you know what I'm saying. When she noticed her little girl begging not to go to the manor, Anneke's mother shrugged and said, "I can't do anything about it." But Anneke refused, and after having enough, her mom dragged her out to the car by her hair, pushed her into the passenger seat, and slammed the door. Anneke tried to jump out, but her mother pinned her to the seat and sped off towards the manor. When she arrived at the mansion, Anneke recalled her mother hit a cement marker in the driveway with her car before dropping her off and speeding off. Florence, the youngest Djarjak daughter, nearly Anneke's age, and her older brother came out of the manor to examine the damage with the family, and they all laughed about it, but Anneke just felt bad for her mom. She knew something was bothering her. In March of 1974, Anneke's mother took her late one Saturday evening to a mansion where they held secret club meetings. Not orgies. And horrified, Anneke knew that Nahul or Patrick, 2 men that she had grown to know throughout this abuse, would never show up to one of these meetings. Anneke begged her mom to take her home, but her mom just smiled and drove off without her. Anneke recalls the room she had spent many nights in an interview on YouTube. Take a look.
It was in March of 1974. One of the places where I was abused, it was not an orgy where I was sometimes taken and brought in late, and then I was just mingling with the people that were there. No, this was a place, a mansion where I was taken sometimes, and I would just have to go straight to a small room, and in that room there was a dirty mattress, and then I would just be there and wait for the men to come.
In her memoir, Anneke recalled the desensitization she had since being with Patrick Hamers, a Belgian criminal, protected by the ugly deeds of the network, and what she experienced that night in that empty mansion, visit after visit after visit from members of this predator network.
I remember this rape particularly well because I'd actually been protected for about 6 months. And so I'd gotten used to not being raped. And so I was back in this dirty room, and the first man that arrived scared me to death. He looked like a gorilla, and he was very gruff, and I thought, again, he's going to say, this is a child, I'm not going to do this, but instead, he got angry with me and just told me, he didn't tell me, he didn't speak my language. He basically motioned for me to take off my clothes. And I remember as I was trying to take off my t-shirt, I got stuck. And so suddenly, I was in this space where I somehow thought I was going to be killed, and I couldn't see anything, and my arms were stuck, and my head was covered, and he ripped the shirt off and laughed. I had seen children be murdered. I had heard of a girl being shot for not acting like everything was okay after being raped. And so I took a risk with this man. I stared coldly at him. And I thought, well, he must not be very important because I know he's just kind of silly and he's okay with this. He's not doing anything. He's not going to do anything to me. So it was a great surprise to find that he was number 2 in a world power.
Anneke's mother showed up nearly a week later after Anneke had lost a ton of weight and had been starved, ratted, and battered, and said to her, "Why didn't you come home? We were worried sick about you." Anneke at that point attempted to tell her stepfather what had happened, but instead, she just felt guilty and blamed herself. And these are only a few of the memories that Anneke has spoken of. In an interview with Handing the Shame Back in 2022, Anneke explained her mother's supposed reasoning as to why she justified pimping her own blood daughter out to network events and exploiting her for money. Take a look.
She seemed to believe that I was going to get a good husband from this. She definitely was crazy that way, that the fact that those people, she considered them as higher up, that she thought that everything was fine and that I was in good hands. She got paid also, but there was this idea in her head that because those people were of high standing, that this was absolutely the thing to do.
Now, the leader of this Belgian predator network to which Anneke belonged was a man named Paul van den Boynants, a high-posted member of Belgian politics, who, along with some other shady people, would negotiate child trafficking. Anneke referred to him as Polo. In one of her podcasts posted in 2023, Anneke spoke of Polo and his identity and how this network really worked.
The main person in Belgium was Paul van den Boynants, who was at the time the Minister of National Defense. He was also acted more like a mafia boss in terms of the network, which I call the network, which was this group of people that had a secret society amongst themselves. I don't know if some came in from secret societies or not. I think that sometimes I was also used at meetings of secret societies. They had a secret club, and I call that the network. And that network was connected not only on the local level in Belgium, but was also connected globally. And it was even connected on a really local level, town level in Belgium. And then those people were then getting opportunities to enter into the network in Belgium through Paul van den Boynants as the big boss at the time, 1969 to 1974.
In an interview with Real Women, Real Stories, Anneke went on to describe the role of the network, of the children involved in the network, and herself.
I was used in this network for 5 years and a half. Adult men that were part of this exclusive club were there for various reasons, but there was a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs, and the children, the commodity, the highest, the most valued commodity, and were used for sex mostly. But there were a number of aristocrats that were part of this club who also liked killing children.
The network was made up of many high-class political and aristocratic members of Belgian society, mostly older men. Anneke, at the time, was unaware of how much power these men held in the real world and didn't know any of their real names until long after she had left and began to wake up to what had happened.
I was also approached by some people who were able to help me identify some of the perpetrators. There's one perpetrator that, like some others, I was able to just type in the country of the person that I knew they were from, which was not in Belgium, politician, and the year, and the person just popped up right away. It was amazing. I had no idea that I was dealing with people who were that important. I had no idea that these were people on the world stage and that they were actually very visible.
In her memoir, Anneke claims that she belonged to a man known as A as his slave for quite some time, even going so far as to describe a graphic encounter with him. Now, keep in mind at this time, Anneke still isn't even a teenager yet. For the first 3 years in the network, Anneke had two main jobs.
So the first 3 years, when I was from age 6 to 9, I was treated as an outsider. I was a little girl who was used as an expendable child. So that was when I was in the Belgian network, and I was used for two things. One was a situation in which I could have certainly been killed at any moment, which was certain aristocrats who were extremely sadistic, who used children, and there you just didn't know if you would survive. And I just, by sheer accident, did survive. And the other way in which I was used was to basically indoctrinate what they call the newcomers, which were really not newcomers. They were just new to raping extremely young children.
When she was 9, Anneke was taken under the wing of a foreign, world-renowned VIP club member and a global network star whom she called Big Shot, who was revealed to be involved with the Belgian Predator ring.
At age 9, I was traded up to what was then an international networker, and that person ended up deciding that I did belong with them, and that had to do with my blood. So there was physically my blood was taken. I don't know what they could tell from that, but they must have also just simply asked my mother who my father was, and then my father comes from a Huguenot family on his mother's side. They were Huguenots. These were aristocrats in France who escaped. They were Protestants. They escaped in the 17th, 18th centuries, a long time ago. This family was called Gaillard de Kerbertin. So they had the small d in their name. They were aristocrats. That means that somewhere they were connected to royals. And that really is what the network is looking for, royal blood. And that makes them special.
Since it decided that she had royal blood, Anneke was then given the privilege of mind control training.
I was determined to be one of them, and that means that I had what they deemed a privilege. That is to say, I got mind control trained, which is torture-based. So again, we're talking about people who do this to their own, those whom they consider their own. And I was a 9-year-old child, and they acted like it was a real honor for me to be able to be part of them.
Anneke went through mind control training for a month, which was based on extreme torture and trauma, under the guise of a man named Dr. Hans Harmsen.
This reality that mind control works, it's horrible to say that, but it creates incredible results. Because in the mind control, in the classic mind control, the trauma creates incredible results. And here, where I was being treated very nicely the whole time, and being treated as someone who's really, really special and who can do no wrong. And so I was being trained to do the things that I naturally love to do. So I sang, but I was naked. And the vulnerability from being naked made me sing a lot better. I was also naked while pictures were taken. I was also naked while I was getting facials. I was also naked while I was getting body massaged. These people were there and they were doing things, but just treating my body as an object of worship. So obviously I wasn't raped during that time. I believe it was 2 weeks, and I think it might have been during the school break around Christmas of 1972, we're talking. And I think that this might have been in France. These people were speaking French, and I was going to be a French entertainer. And my persona was going to be part of the Pedooo agenda. As a little girl, the mind control training had me heavily sexualized.
Anneke's work as an entertainer or performer was what Anneke referred to as the game. She claimed that the perpetrators never needed to say a word. She anticipated their every whim, fluidly and automatically, and fulfilled their deepest emotional needs and sexual desires.
So the purpose of me being an entertainer was only that I would have the platform so that the most powerful men in the world would be attracted to me. I specifically was trained so that they would fall in love with me and think that I was their dream girl. And then as an adult, I would be their life partner. I would be able to give them that one thing that they never received anywhere else, and then they would fall in love with me. That is to say, the young part in them that never felt loved.
Keep in mind, she still isn't even a teenager at this point. The trauma inflicted on Anneke during her extensive training was designed to systematically kill off any hopes and feelings she had so that she could appear as an adult and block off any other feelings such as fear, horror, surprise, and sadness again until a perpetrator specifically requested one of those emotions. Anneke discussed this further in an interview with Handing the Shame Back in 2022.
You know, that was also how I connected with those men, is to see their deepest wounds. And I had been trained to detect those wounds, specifically for me to be able to put that sort of soothing balm of my awareness and forced love on those wounds.
Yeah.
But I did see it. And I did do that also from a sort of a natural place of wanting love. You give love because you want love, right?
Yeah.
Additionally, Anneke mentioned that mind control trauma in a slave worked to punish the mind beyond thought, open up intuition and psychic abilities, and then put all of these abilities in service to the slave owners. For example, Big Shot, that Hollywood elite guy, once sent Anneke to spend a weekend with a top German politician and asked her to return to him afterwards to report the politician's weaknesses to him to give him an advantage in his business and government dealings. It was strictly politics, he claimed. In her memoir, A Quest for Love, Anneke stated, "My deadening feelings make me appear mature in the same way that the perpetrators also only appear mature. They don't have control over their feelings like truly mature people. Their feelings are deadened. My own deadness ensures that they will never be faced with the reality that they are hurting a child. The most insecure and immature men need power the most, because they are the most deadened." However, in the week leading up to April 30th, 1973, during Anneke's induction into the network, where she first performed with Big Shot as her manager, Anneke was kidnapped by an Italian couple and taken to a place called Lake Como. The wife of this couple was extremely jealous of Anneke's ability to sing, and so they humiliated her.
And here was this couple who were using me, where the husband treated me as a dirty little object, and that's how they wanted me to feel. And she got all the praise and the laudation from him. And they also did some kind of a ritual in a church in Monaco, a reversal ritual where my purity was transferred to her. There was something about my breasts. My breasts were just beginning to bud, and that these little young girl breasts were hers now. And I was getting her self-hatred of her body. Yeah, so with incantations and fire, and then this sexual abuse that was so humiliating, so horrendous.
Anneke went on to say that they kept her for a day before returning her for her induction into the Predator network, and that was the last straw.
I have to thank those that envious singer for breaking my program and sort of waking me up to, what is this? You know, this is crazy. This is absolute insanity. And yes, this hook for me, like, you're so nice. Like, if you're not even going to be, if you can't even do that, then forget it. And I'm not going to be part of this.
So after rejecting Big Shot's plans for her, after days of intense punishment, Anneke was returned to Belgium. working again for Polo, another senior VIP member of the Predator ring. Which one, Polo would ask. That was the starting line of the game in a huge room full of old, disgusting pedophiles. The whole purpose of this game was to buy Anneke enough time as possible before having to go upstairs with anyone. Additionally, she recalled the shocking statistics of the time that she spent there. Be prepared for your jaw to drop.
I was in that network for 5 years and a half. In that time, I was raped many, many, many times. I don't have any scars to show how many times I was raped, but I did the math. Usually it was a whole night in the weekend. And so I gathered that I was raped, actually raped, for about 6 hours a week. 1,716 hours of before I reached the age of 12.
In her memoir, Anneke also recalled that the she had attended around Brussels were bloodthirsty and relentless, whether they were in castles, bars, or villages. You never knew exactly what could or what would happen. Anneke was able to translate these high-profile orgies in which she attended, unbeknownst to Polo and his men, because she was particularly skilled in French and Flemish, and was learning other languages such as Italian at the time. Now, Phillle, the man that we've talked about extensively for his involvement in the Dutroux affair, was the businessman who became the middleman between the child victims, the pimps, the predators, and Polo. He arranged everything at these parties, running around tirelessly to please these aristocrats who wanted to attend to do these disturbing things. Gaspard, one of the big shots who ran the network, would offer Anneke to other men who were there by running his hands across her jeans, her butt, and the inside of her thighs. And this was common practice. They would then retreat to her room to have sex. Anneke was a part of this predator network for 5.5 years. In 1973, at one of the orgies, Anneke met 21-year-old Patrick Hamers, whom she thought was another child in the network, but he turned out to be quite different. Patrick Hamers was a Belgian criminal who seduced 11-year-old Anneke and wrapped her up in a world of love. As it turned out, he was different than other children in the network. He had authority and power, and he wasn't exploited like many of the others. Patrick convinced Polo to let him have Anneke to himself, and he whisked her up to a bedroom in the castle, where he swore that he wasn't going to lay a finger on her, and he didn't. He served as a refuge for her for quite some time. Patrick and Anneke became quite acquainted with each other, spending much of their time together at one of the mansions, where he supposedly kept her safe. In her memoir, Anneke went on to describe several detailed memories of her time with Patrick. One time, while they were spending time in an upstairs manor bedroom, Anneke told Patrick of an incident involving Polo, in which Polo had beaten her badly, hitting her repeatedly and throwing her around the room, saying, "It gave me such pleasure to hold out against him," until he said, "Just get your clothes and get out of here. You're so dead, there's nothing to be done with you." The next day, after she was beaten by Polo, Anneke's mother brought her back to the house, where Polo and Phillle, a Belgian businessman and convicted felon, and took her down to the basement where her friend was stripped and killed. And afterwards, biting beetles were released which swarmed all over the girls' bodies, a story that she shared with Brecht Arnart in 2022.
I screamed, but very quickly I crouched down, and so they were in my hair, and I was naked, so they were biting me all over. Very quickly, I felt a presence, which I felt quite often. Benign, loving presence that calmed me down. And then this time there was some insight, and the insight was that the bugs are not the monster. They're just natural creatures. They're scared. They're out of their habitat. And as I relaxed, it seemed like I couldn't really feel the bite so much anymore. They left. They were bored. I wasn't entertaining anymore.
Phillle and Polo left.
Then, to Anneke's surprise, Patrick leaned over and whispered loudly that he loved her. In another memory, she shared an experience with him that she had with another boy in the network, a boy that was about 7 years old, who she knew as Wouter. Wouter had been screaming in the basement that they were being tortured in, and hearing these screams, it made the men that were torturing the children go even harder, until Wouter ended up dead. Anneke recalled the feeling of loneliness that she endured at these orgies, outside of her love for Patrick, saying that after her friend Wouter was killed, she made sure to never befriend another child, for they only used the love that the children felt for each other to hurt them even more. Anneke went on to say, Patrick seems to be her only hope for love, but girls in love with perpetrators are bound to be dropped, and heartbroken, they are considered worthless in the network, and that is one way for sex slaves to get themselves killed. In winter 1973, at a Christmas party, Anneke was met by Phillle Nahul, who frowned at Anneke as she came in with a Dioraks, the family that we talked about at the beginning, saying, "We have no need for her here. She's off limits for now. There's a daddy's boy who wants her all to himself." Florence Dioriak was shocked, knowing exactly who Phillle Nahul was referring to. Patrick, someone she had also taken a kin to as well, and she was pissed. Later that evening, Florence boldly has sex on the settee next to Anneke with a full line of men, including her own blood father, the Count Dioriak, in a sick, twisted act, before later disappearing with who appeared to be Patrick, or so Anneke had thought at the time. But later, when Patrick appeared to Anneke, he denied being with Florence and instead whisked her off down the expressway in his red Porsche 911 towards Brussels. At his home, Patrick played a Rolling Stones record for her, serenading her and suggesting that he thought she was naive for not having sex with him, but he didn't care. And then later reiterates, "You can't always get what you want," and winks at her. In the early spring of 1974, Anneke attended a networking event at a greenhouse on a particular property called Kattenhof Castle in Gravenwezel, Belgium. The parties there were filled with numerous children, more children than adults. The adults were all aristocratic men, the elites of Belgium, and they wasted no time in flirting with these children. And these men would talk to Phillle Nahul, point out the victims that they wanted to take for themselves, and either proceed with what they wanted to do, or wait, just to torture the victims a little bit longer. And the little aristocrats, whose families seemed to be going through the motions of hosting these so-called parties, acted as hostesses, including Florence Dioriak, who I just told you about, was right next to Anneke and had relations with a full Congo line of men just to get back at her. In one memory at this location, this chateau, Anneke recalled Phillle Nahul being there, as well as Patrick, the guy who was supposedly protecting her. And as Anneke headed upstairs to the bedroom that she shared with Patrick, Phillle stopped Patrick to ask him when he would start sharing her, and Patrick, very loudly, threatened to kill him. Upstairs, Patrick showed Anneke his gun, asking her if she'd ever seen a dead body, and encouraged her to tell her stories of them. Anneke became angry and went on to tell Patrick of the very first time that she saw a dead body, saying, quote, "I don't think Nahul was there yet, but an old handler came over, a smile on his face. 'Come along,' he said, like a friend. He took my hand and we went for a walk. I was very scared, but he was friendly. I can't remember how we got from one place to the next. We ended up in a large basement, and he said, 'You know, we like you here. We'd hate to lose you.' And as we went deeper into this cellar, it was dark. I started to smell something, a faint but unmistakably sick odor, very specific. I would recognize it right away. Then I think he turned on a light that was maybe just a bare bulb, and there was a bath made of cement at the far end of this cellar, and he led me to the other side of it. He still had this easygoing attitude, like this is just something that happens if you talk, but there's no need to worry if you don't. So, at that moment, I completely got on his wavelength. The first thing I did was tell myself that this was not a human being, just a dead body, and there was nothing to be afraid of. I looked at her in the same way that I felt he did, like old leftovers. She was a young woman, and I remember thinking she looked working class, maybe had been a prostitute. And then I thought it was strange that I should have such a thought about a dead person. I did not feel horrified, and I still don't. She had a round, soft body, very, very white, all cut up. The deepest cut was this slash in her belly, horizontal, and it was open, like a purse. I stayed on the handler's wavelength for as long as he kept me in there, which seemed much longer than necessary. I got the message right away. I didn't plan on telling my stepfather about what had happened, at least not in so many words." End quote. Anneke also told Patrick that she went on to tell her mother what had happened in that basement, but she felt she hadn't expressed herself enough, as her mother did nothing. She was too afraid of the dead body and too ashamed, and didn't know how to clearly express herself. At 6 years old. But when her mother started driving her to the herself, she thought she had given her the idea by trying to tell her, and therefore, it was all her fault. "Your mother is no good. She doesn't love you," Patrick told her. The next morning at the greenhouse property, Anneke was awoken by several gunshots, shocked to find that someone was hunting one of the Moroccan children from the orgy she had seen the night before at the party, with bronze skin and dark curls outside their bedroom window. Horrified, Anneke begged Patrick to take her home, but he just casually gazed out at the child's dead body outside on the ground, unfazed. And Anneke was haunted by him asking the night before if she had ever seen a dead body. When Anneke saw the boy at the orgy the night before, she had made unmistakable eye contact with him, and according to her, his eyes begged her to talk to him, but Patrick just smirked at him and whipped her away. In late 1974, Patrick and Anneke had sex for the first time, starting a long, complicated physical relationship. Patrick accuses Anneke of not being the age she is, and is in complete disbelief when she tells him she's only 11 years old, and he's nearly 21. But even hearing this from the victim's mouth doesn't stop Patrick from having sex with her. Later that month, the two of them take off to the Belgian countryside. In May, Anneke told Patrick of another memory, in which she saw a girl she had seen before in one of the other mansions. Patrick and Anneke offered her food sweetly, and Anneke recalled in her memoir, quote, "I wish she, the girl, could figure out which men favor which girls, and learn to maneuver her way through the web, attracting the men who are more or less safe, avoiding the dangerous ones, and leaving alone the indifferent ones. Surviving is a skill, like any other, sharpened by intuition, in which I was losing," end quote. Later that night, the two retreated to Patrick's house, where Patrick asks Anneke to stab him in the hand with a penknife, and she objected, telling him of a traumatic experience in which Polo, her old handler, made her choose between her life or a baby rabbit, and because she chose herself, she was forced to then kill the rabbit. But then Anneke stabbed him swiftly, carelessly, as the trained soldier that she was, and the two of them then made a blood tie. Fast forward to later that year, at one of these predator parties, Anneke found network regulars standing over the body of the little girl that they had come across that day. Anneke recalled that, quote, "The Baron was holding a thin braid in his hand, like a pendulum, as her loose hair gently wafted through the air. Her blood is the red, the brown, drenching the burlap on the floor," end quote. And it was at that point that Anneke realized she couldn't avoid the dangerous ones after all. In June, Anneke described a weekend in which Patrick took her to a beach villa that his parents owned. They walked on the beach, and Anneke told him that she wanted to leave for the south of France. To her surprise, Patrick agreed she should go, saying that they will never be more than what they are now. Later that night, Patrick insisted on leaving Anneke with a scar like he had, but on the back of her knee, the most tender spot on the body. And so, he stabbed her. But to her surprise, Anneke learns that the reason why Patrick has a limp is because he was stabbed in the back of the knee also, by his father. They then headed further south to the French Riviera, where they stayed for weeks, having sex, having deep conversations, and enjoying each other's company. There, Anneke asked Patrick why he enjoyed killing people and robbing banks. Here's a quote.
And he had shared with me that he would put, when he was killing people, that he would put a gun to their heads, because he said it puts you in touch with the truth of that person. They reveal their truth. And then when he had them in that situation, he started, showing his disgust, but basically would be someone trying to survive, their weakness in that moment of what he calls then betraying.
Then, after a few weeks, Patrick left her at the house, saying he would return for her. When he finally returned, he angrily threw her into the car and took her home, throwing all of her things out of the window of his car and treating her like shit. And in the blink of an eye, Anneke's back home with her mother, without an explanation as to why Patrick had acted that way. Afterwards, Anneke didn't eat for 5 days, and as a result of her choices, her mom drugged her, giving her copious amounts of sleeping pills and forcing them down her own daughter's throat. Anneke later awoke to hear Patrick in her house, and managed to crawl off in her dazed state to find Patrick and her own mother having sex in the bedroom. After seeing this, Anneke's world came crashing down, and she tried to take life, taking the rest of the bottle of sleeping pills. But this attempt was unsuccessful. In July, Anneke's mother returned her to the network events of this predator ring, where she ran into Patrick for the first time in a few days, chased him upstairs, and slapped him hard in the face. Patrick explained that he was curious. That's why he had sex with her mother. Anneke just screamed at him and called him a traitor. Afterwards, Patrick beat her up, saying she should be thanking him for her protection before they fight. And afterwards, Patrick then violently starts raping her. Later, Patrick apologized and drove her back home that night, kissing her goodnight. Anneke's mom looked pleased when she returned home, with a disfigured face from Patrick's abuse. And coming up with a cover story, Anneke told her brother that she had simply hit her face on a swing. Her brother was clueless at this time. Anneke then goes on to say that in the next few days after this, as the bruises on her face healed, she began to believe the idea that she ran into a swing, as people commented and joked about it. And in her own mind, she began creating a false memory. But let's briefly jump back to April 1974, during a brief period in which Anneke's mother refused to take her back to the Diorak mansion after several incidents there. During one of those nights, Anneke met up with Florence, her boyfriend Danny, and his 3 friends on a street corner. The 3 boys proceeded to rape Anneke in a barn, and Anneke describes the brutal experience in her memoir. But after this assault, the youngest of the boys, a man named Peter Bosmans, stayed in the barn with her and told Anneke that this was supposed to be his initiation into the Predator network, and that he didn't know that it was going to be this way. They then cuddled for some time after that, and they both agreed to see each other again. When she finally got home after this affair with Peter, Anneke's mother and father were worried sick and forbade her from seeing Florence for another 3 weeks. But due to these years of psychological, sexual, and physical abuse, Anneke wasn't even bothered. In her memoir, she said, quote, "Girls like myself, whose parents give them to the network, usually don't survive their teens, but if someone from outside the network cares about me, who knows? I go to bed full of hope and happiness, thinking that maybe there is a chance for me," end quote. But days later, when Anneke went to meet up with Peter again, he didn't show. But in August of 1974, Anneke ran into Danny again, one of the perpetrators of the original gang rape. Anneke asked him what happened to Peter, and apparently, Florence never told him that Anneke liked Peter, as she had agreed to, and just told Danny that she had an older boyfriend. So he agreed to set them back up. When they finally met back up, Peter and Anneke go for a walk, and Anneke told Peter of her real life, of everything she does, and how as soon as Patrick drops her, she'll be dead. And she thinks that that's going to be very soon. And to her horror, in that moment she realized that it could be sooner than she was thinking. And she suddenly remembers that she never ran into the swing. She had been violently abused. At this point, Peter also tells Anneke of his life, a seemingly normal life for a 14-year-old. Before they talked, and Peter raped her for the rest of the night. When Anneke arrived back home the next morning, she was greeted by Patrick at her front door, right inside the entryway, talking to her mother. He took Anneke upstairs and tried to rape her, but she fought back, grabbing and shoving him until he grabbed his gun and placed it on her forehead. Anneke recalled her thinking through this moment, as the gun was cocked on her forehead, saying, quote, "Patrick told me he uses his gun to break through the lies, that when you confront someone with their death, they reveal their truth. What is my truth? He wants me to drop the cold front and be the person who loves him," end quote. And finally, she gave in, thinking of Peter, and Patrick proceeded to rape her. The next day, Patrick and Anneke met at the castle in their bedroom, where they had first met. Patrick then tells Anneke that he just got home yesterday, having been gone for 2 to 3 weeks in France. At that moment, Anneke realized that her mother lied to her a few weeks ago when she told Anneke that she was going out with Patrick, that it never happened. Patrick told Anneke that her mom isn't that bad after all, and bewildered, Anneke leaves. They later spend the evening avoiding each other when Anneke spots Patrick talking to Florence, his face furious. Next, Patrick confronted Anneke about Peter, her new love, and chased her down the hallway with a knife. Angry, Patrick cut the back of Anneke's legs recklessly with a knife, asking if his limp was why she didn't love him, and she said, "I do love you." Anneke asked Patrick to tell her the story of what happened to the back of his knee, and Patrick refused to tell the details, only saying, "I did something, and my father was really hurt by that." Anneke recovered at his castle for 5 days, and then Patrick drove her home, acting the same as he always did, gentlemanly, friendly, and calm. On the morning that Anneke finally returned home, Anneke found Peter waiting outside the front of her house. Anneke then snuck out and went back with Peter to his home. Peter had been worried about Anneke for a few days and had been waiting for her to return home. He then spent the rest of the night tending to her knife wounds and feeding her. Peter told her that he was preparing to tell his father about her and would like to keep her at his house for as long as he could. Anneke told him that they should run away or she'll be killed, because Patrick, obviously, is crazy. And Peter then consoled her as she cried. Anneke realized at that moment that she probably loves Patrick more than Peter, and told him that, discussing how horrible she felt that she was, asking how he could even stand to love her. And hearing all this, Peter just calmly kissed her and tried to comfort her. She believed that she was no good for him. She was rotten. Later that week, Anneke met up with Peter and told him that they couldn't have sex anymore. She said that she was angry and didn't want to talk about it. She insisted once again that the two of them should run away. But Peter refused, and Anneke fought him, crying. But even after all of this, she ended up staying at Peter's place anyways. But when they left the next morning, as Peter dropped her off at her house, Anneke belittled him, saying, "I don't care about you. You know that? I don't love you. I never loved you. I love Patrick." And Peter drove off. On September 12th, 1974, Anneke and Patrick went for a walk in the woods, and they got into a fight over Patrick's Gucci loafers. When they returned back to the castle, Patrick hit Anneke as hard as he could, repeatedly, until she told him, "I don't love you. I love Peter." Immediately, Patrick stopped the beating and coldly told Anneke he's going to kill Peter. They then fought and tussled in the bedroom, with Anneke begging Patrick not to kill Peter as they clung to each other, fighting. But eventually, Patrick is able to lock Anneke in the room and said, "I can see you really do love the little bastard, or you wouldn't care so much whether he lives or dies." And afterwards, he left. When Patrick returned later on, he unlocked the door, came into the room that Anneke had been held in, and told her, "Peter is dead." And hearing this, Anneke was devastated. Now, in her memoir, Anneke noted that she went to Peter's house in 2005 when she was doing research for her book and briefly met Peter's father. She said, quote, "On September 12th, 1974, at 4:10 p.m., upon returning home from work, he found Peter's lifeless body on the floor of the kitchen of their house. The stove was turned on. Gas was seeping out. The death was recorded as an accident. During this meeting, I could not tell him the real cause of Peter's death, for it would cause unnecessary suffering to someone who never fully recovered. Peter Bosmans, 5/31/1960 to 9/12/1974." End quote. By the end of September, Anneke had started doing cocaine with Patrick, trying to do anything to numb the feelings of grief and sadness that she felt about Peter's death. Keep in mind, Anneke's still not even a teenager throughout any of this. And this just goes to show how these sick people, these machinations of these predator rings work, especially in cases like this. They break down these victims, they erode their mentality. So instead of seeing themselves as being assaulted, they start to view it as they're loving their assaulters and they're having sex. It's completely different than actually what was happening. These were grown men raping young innocent victims. And Anneke discusses all of this at length. And I mean, this is real. This is the reality of the world. There's so many thousands of children that have these life stories like this, but we just don't listen to them. People read Anneke's book and they call her crazy, but I don't. I didn't. I believe her, and I hope you do too. But let's get back to her story. On one chilly October evening in 1974 at the castle, Anneke and Patrick were having sex. Patrick was again raping Anneke, and the two of them got into an argument. Patrick told her to go downstairs with her friends if she wasn't excited by their intercourse. And Anneke, talking about her friends, simply replied, "I don't have any." Patrick asked her if it was true that the other kids hadn't liked her before they met, and Anneke said it was true, before saying, "I thought you liked me." Patrick proceeded then to brutally beat Anneke up while telling her that he never loved her, and he had been lying to her the entire time. He went on to claim that he had been sleeping with Florence, Anneke's mother, and numerous other women the entire time they'd been together. Patrick then berated Anneke and kicked her out of the bedroom, telling her she was arrogant and calling her a little whore. By the time Anneke made it downstairs, Florence and her friends showed her to the bathroom and again berated her. And disturbingly, Florence and the other adults then sexually assaulted Anneke themselves in order to, as they described, check for Patrick's sperm inside of her. And when they didn't find any, they told Anneke, "You were lying. You weren't with Patrick." Florence told Anneke, "You have no idea how hard it is to not have a period yet. You have no idea. I've been pregnant already. I had to have an abortion. It was really scary and painful. I could have died. I have to worry about that every month, every time." Afterwards, Anneke is dragged out to the main party floor to meet with Michel Nahul, the ringleader of the Predator Ring, who's told something by Florence that absolutely excites him. Anneke recalls being ready to meet her fate at this point, thinking she's about to die. In an interview with Real Women, Real Stories, Anneke recalls her torture.
I was strapped to a butcher's block that was black from the blood of all the children that had come before me. I was there for a few hours. My body is full of scars, and every scar reminds me of the moment. I thought that I was going to be killed like all the children that weren't loved enough to live, and I was going to be forgotten as well, and I wasn't ready to die.
Anneke described the graphic torture she endured from Michelle Nahul and a group of children from the network. It started with Michelle burning a cigarette into her arm before they began using several tools on her, including a penknife, scissors, a screwdriver, a razor blade, a fish hook, and other medical tools to destroy Anneke's body. Now keep in mind, Anneke is being gleefully tortured by other victims at this point. All of these children are so mentally broken down that they follow these orders and they dive headfirst into their assignments. And this stuff is just so hard. This whole story is just so hard to even comprehend, even for me just reading this research out. So Michelle Nahul, the ringleader of the Predator ring, demonstrated to these children how they could use these tools on Anneke to cause as much pain and to destroy her body as quickly as possible. During this demonstration, Michelle dug a medical tool with a cone-shaped point into Anneke's arm to make a very deep wound. He then sliced her cheek open with a bar of warped steel and told the other children in the room to do the same. But Anneke claims that she felt nothing from any of this. During this torture, she had eased herself into a state of deep relaxation, of complete bodily and mental disassociation. In her memoir, Anneke recalled her feelings at this very moment, saying, quote, "In the German mind control facility, I was strapped down frequently and learned to withstand anything, but there was always a specific purpose to the torture there. It was to get me into a state, to get into my subconscious mind and unlock parts of my brain so I could do something specific that would serve some purpose. But the purpose there was not to kill me. I am close to feeling. I could easily cry. I could let myself feel the pain over Patrick's betrayal, Nahul's cruelty. I could remind myself that I am the child. I could think about the fishhook, which painfully pulls and stretches the skin from the inside, bruises before it rips. Or I could think about the blood flowing from several dozen wounds, creeping all over my skin, tickling like mad, and I cannot wipe it off. I realized that I was powerless. But if I do that, I will slide into the role play. Then I will be powerless, and Nahul almighty. I will be one side of the coin, and Nahul the other. One divided into two, inseparable, bonded by the play, by the lie." End quote. Michelle Nahul then went on to dig a strap of nails deep into Anneke's right arm, underneath her deltoid, systematically stabbing, hitting several points at once, creating an armband of blood, and another one of the children does the same to her left arm. Michelle then used an apple corer to hack away at Anneke's shin, hitting the bone, and one of the little girls stabbed Anneke in the forearm with a penknife. Then Nahul demanded someone bring him a meat cleaver, saying that he's going to chop off Anneke's foot, when all of a sudden, Anneke recalled the door opening and one of Polo's friends entering the room, saying, "That's enough, you can let her go now." And that was it. When Anneke finally left the butcher's room, dressed and beaten and battered, Patrick was in the hallway waiting for her, openly raping at the time an 8 or 9-year-old girl, out in the open in front of everybody else, purposely in front of Anneke. And after seeing her, he took her to Polo's office, where Polo's friend who saved her, Polo, and the other girl are sitting. Polo then told Anneke that she has a price to pay and has to decide if it's going to be her or the little girl. And according to Anneke, she said, her. Patrick then cleaned Anneke up and drove her to a house where Polo, the girl, and a few others had gone to carry out a murder. After Anneke said that the other girl should be killed, things suddenly changed. Patrick cleaned Anneke up, put her in the car, and drove her off the property. Polo, Anneke's old pimp, the other little girl, and a few others also left the chateau, and they all went to a random house for a disturbing celebration. After they got to this home, Patrick cut and lined up lines of cocaine for the group and told Anneke that he sold his life for hers and was now going to work for Polo, saying, "I guess I didn't want you to die after all." Anneke reflected on this moment in a 2023 podcast with The Courage to Change.
While I was being tortured, he went negotiated for my life to get me out, which was something that eventually did cost him his life. It was a good deed. It was selfless in that moment. It cost him his life.
When the group finally retreated to the basement of this random house, that small girl was then tied to a dentist's chair. Patrick then showed Anneke how to cut wounds on the girl, and Anneke did, feeling every shock that the girl felt rippling through her body, before this group of grown men and women proceeded to burn the little girl while she was in the dentist's chair and completely slice her open. Finally, Anneke was given a dagger to stab the little girl and end her life. In her memoir, Anneke states, quote, "Situations from the past in which I could have defended myself float through my mind as I prepare to stab the girl. All of the men of the network pass the review. I see them looking at me the way they looked at her tonight, like a collection of legs, thighs, and genitals. I remember countless faces, countless scornful gazes. I see the icy stare of the sterile Gaspard, the clumsy first-timers acting like I am so adept, and they are so adolescent, the charmers needing eye contact, confusing me with their coy looks, connecting as if they saw me, the way Patrick looked at this girl tonight. I recall the hundreds of men who came into that little room with the dirty mattress in the mansion, and not one of them said, "No, this is a child. I cannot do this. I came to this event, but now I'm alone in a room with a child, and I will not stoop to this." Not one of them ever stopped himself. I am furious at Mama. Mama never stopped herself. This girl is not Mama. I wish it was Mama strapped to the dentist chair. Mama had sex with Patrick. Mama, what did you do to me? Mama, what did you do to me? Why did you have me? End quote. Then, according to Anneke, she raised up the dagger high in the air and plunged the sharp blade heavily into the girl's body, slicing through the lower belly of the child in the dentist chair. Here's another quote from her book. I hear the dull thud of the point hitting bone. The knife stands vertically, the blade incised below the navel, across the pelvis. I now have killed myself before birth. I now have killed my mother. I now have killed this little girl. I am now ready to die. With my last strength and bleeding wounds, I pull the enormous dagger out of her flesh. I fall, and everything goes black. End quote. So, if you're still sticking through me here, still sticking through with me here, this is all incredibly stuff to read about. And after this, Anneke had a near-death experience in which she was out of touch with her physical body and in tune with a beam of light, that she was able to hear everything around her.
And then the near-death experience that followed, which put me directly, on the other side of the ether. And then that put me directly in front of my own teacher and other beings. It wasn't just that teacher, there were other beings there. And this absolutely glorious experience, I can't describe it any other way. It was more true than anything else I've ever experienced. And it gave me the bliss that is lifting the veil a little bit and just feeling that tremendous love and the bliss. And I would say the humor of God's humor, or, my teacher's humor, sense of humor. This was my teacher. I didn't know if this was a male or a female, but I did know our issues from, he reminded me directly of a past life in which I had reached some degree of love, but couldn't understand these people who hurt and killed children. And so it was very clear that I had been given this experience in order to use this life to develop my love fully, to be able to love everyone. But the bliss I experienced there was also to model what I should be striving for in my healing.
Anneke then continues describing her near-death experience, saying in her memoir, quote, "The teacher divines my burning wish. Can I stay? The answer is immediate. I will have to return. I receive images that clarify why. Visions of future events roll before my eyes. Multi-layered purposes are revealed about my life, about this experience. I receive everything instantaneously, outside of time. And each piece of information is consistent with a particular present or future need. I wonder about Patrick. If I have to return, will I be with him in the near or distant future? After tonight, you will not see him again," says the teacher. "Who will love me? You have divine love. You want human love as well?" Through irony, glorious beauty, through straightforward truths, the teacher is speaking directly to my nature, expressing the aspects to which I am the most drawn. Thus, I understand that I am loved no matter what I have done, and this knowledge I will have to find once again as I return to the world and live my life, even as I bear the guilt over the murder. Guilt so enormous, it will be a mental disease. I will need to learn and love and understand myself in order to learn to love and understand others. My audience is drawing to a close, and longingly, I take in the beloved teacher one last time. I bow before his feet and before the exalted beings. I stay prostrate. I stay prostrate for a very long time. I don't know how long." End quote. When Anneke awakes on the floor in her physical form, her entire body, according to her, has been healed from all her wounds, and Patrick is standing, terrified, in the corner of the room. Now, something interesting is that Anneke's experience of near death and what she encountered while her soul was meeting with who she called was the teacher is very similar to the experiences that many others who have had near-death experiences have talked about. There are actually a number of books out there regarding near-death experiences, and in these books, which I've read, the physical body literally dies. And they almost always involve a teacher figure, a god, a light, ethereal being, which gives you the answers to all of your questions that you could ever have or know. The answers to everything. And during these near-death experiences, according to survivors, you either go on to be with the light and unconditional love forever and all your loved ones, or return to your physical body, such as Anneke did. I've also additionally read, as crazy as it sounds, about these experiences where, like Anneke, after coming out of this, the person is completely healed, whether it be from terminal cancer, from diseases, or from injury. These are very, very interesting experiences. Actually, on my YouTube, the other YouTube channel, The Paranormal Files that I have, I recently interviewed a guy who had a near-death experience after he was shot in Detroit by his friends who ended up, it was like a gang initiation thing, and they blew his arm off and his arm was hanging off of his body, swinging around. He talks about having an out-of-body experience very similar to like these. But anyways, back to Anneke. Anneke went on to say the following regarding that out-of-body experience.
I don't believe that Van Boeynants and the people that were there at the ritual, which was the last ritual, I had a near-death experience. I believe, as far as they knew, that I had died. That was certainly their plan to begin with. So I don't know if they knew that I came back to life and that I was taken back to my home with very specific instructions for my survival. I don't know if anybody in the network knew that I was alive.
As Anneke related in her podcast and with others, Patrick then took her home, rescuing her one final time from the Predator network.
And when he took me home with those instructions, and he told me his whole story that I was able to piece together then later on, I feel that symbolically he gave me his story and his innocent child self to be redeemed, because I had that strength, that spiritual strength that he felt he lacked. So he was selfless in that moment, and maybe the only moment in his life that he was selfless, but it was selfless.
And his instructions to you, will you take us through those?
Yeah, sure. So it was never become a prostitute, never sleep with anyone for money, never buy drugs. You can take them, but only if they're given to you, and you can never do anything to get them. Don't become an alcoholic. You can have like 1 or 2 glasses of wine a night, never drink more than that. That was very clear. He said I should forget everything, forget him, and never speak of the network, never do it. I should marry. I should find someone my age, not an older man who made his own fortune, but someone my age from a wealthy family, preferably a family of New York bankers, and that's how I should marry.
Afterwards, Anneke asked Patrick to hold her one last time before she got out of the car at her mother's house, and he did, and told her to come find him in 10 years so that they could be together. But Anneke knows that will never happen, based on what the teacher had just told her. Before she went inside, Patrick went on to tell Anneke what really happened, why his father stabbed him in the back of the leg.
Then he eventually told me his own trauma as a boy, which had his father put a gun to his head, treat him as that traitor, except it was completely convoluted because it wasn't that situation, it wasn't the truth. It was that father's insanity who felt betrayed by his son when he found him in bed with his wife. So he felt the son who he was raping was betraying him rather than that the wife was, I mean, so crazy. So that trauma, that was his trauma. And he repeated that his whole life, and he killed people from that place of that boy feeling so ashamed and such a traitor in that moment where there was no redemption for that boy.
Patrick said, first he was going to kill me. He held a gun to my head, but then he changed his mind. He felt that I betrayed him. Anneke ended her memoir, Quest for Love, with the following thoughts regarding Patrick. Quote, I think of Patrick holding the gun to my head. I think of Patrick telling me about holding the gun to the heads of the men that he killed. I think of Peter and understand that Patrick killed the young rival he himself once was, and that he killed a part of himself with Peter. Pushed into crime in Phillle by his own father, Patrick loyally plays his assigned role of the bad guy, while his parents get to look decent. But once I have turned the corner onto the little dirt path towards the unlocked back door where the parked car would disappear from view altogether, I turn and catch his eye and savor, for the last time, the deep and effortless intimacy I have known with Patrick Hamers. So what ended up happening to the people involved in this predator ring? What's the real story of who these people actually were, aside from the nicknames and the first name stuff that we've been talking about this entire time? Well, let's talk about him. Patrick Hamers, the guy we've been talking about this entire time, was in 1978 sentenced to 3 years in prison for the rape of a prostitute. He only ended up serving 14 months. In October 1981, he attacked a bank in Belgium, which was his first robbery, with his father, Phillle. 350,000 Belgian francs were retrieved from the car afterwards. Phillle said that he was near the bank to prevent his son from making a mistake. In June 1982, Patrick was sentenced to 2 years of prison, while his father was acquitted of the charges. In March of 1985, Patrick married a woman named Denise Tyack, and on November 4th, 1985, Patrick and his gang robbed a postal money transport in Verviers, killing 2 postal employees. As it turns out, from 1982 to 1985, the country of Belgium was terrorized by a gang that killed a total of 28 and wounded over 40 people. This gang has come to be known as the Brabant Killers. They've never been caught. In the fall of 1985, the gang focused on a popular chain of large supermarkets and killed anybody in sight inside, including children. On November 9th, 1985, at a supermarket in Alost, Belgium, 9-year-old David Van de Steen saw a killer's mask fall off. The attack left him crippled and killed his entire family. When he was shown a picture of the killer, he recognized Patrick immediately, but the press never believed him or followed up. In 1986, Patrick was arrested again and imprisoned as a suspect in 9 armed robberies. On August 13, 1987, a small group of armed men with the help of Denise staged Patrick's escape from prison during a transfer from court. The 2 guards in the transport vehicle were shot in the legs and remained disabled for life. That's the story of Patrick, and we don't know what happened to him. There's also Paul Polo van den Boynants. Popularly called VDB in Belgium, Paul started out as a butcher and quickly built a meat processing empire. In 1948, he joined the Conservative Party, and in 1949, he was elected into the Belgian parliament. He was a council member in Brussels from 1952 until 1955, and from 1966 until 1968, he was the Prime Minister of Belgium. From 1972 until 1979, he was the Minister of National Defense. During his tenure, he supplied entire army units with new weaponry via large international contracts. He tried to reform the army and militarize the state, but large public protests put a stop to his plans. From 1977 until 1979, he led the extreme right-wing CEPIC organization, which was disbanded after conflicting interests were discovered with the fascist militant group Front de la Jeunesse, or the Youth Front. In 1978, Van den Boynants once again became Prime Minister for a year, simultaneously maintaining his post as Minister of National Defense. In 1985, Polo was convicted of fiscal fraud concerning 137 cases of tax evasion and forgery, and was committed to 3 years in prison. On January 14, 1989, Polo was kidnapped. 1 month later, after a ransom of 63 million francs was paid, he was released. The press and the entire country were enthralled. He was more popular than ever. 2 investigators in Polo's case got on the trail of Patrick Hamers and were eventually led to his hiding place, thanks to his father, Phillle. On May 17, 1989, Patrick, his wife Denise, and a friend were apprehended in Brazil. He did interviews following his arrest and admitted to his role in Polo's kidnapping. Interesting, right? Almost like the 2 knew each other from the pedophile ring that they were involved with. Patrick then remained in custody in Brazil for almost a year and was extradited to Belgium on April 1, 1990. Patrick's trial was scheduled to occur on April 19, 1993, but arrived to find it was delayed. On May 14, 1993, Patrick allegedly killed himself in his prison cell by hanging. He was 40 years old. No autopsy was performed, and no one was even allowed to view Patrick's body before it was disposed of. In early 1993, Polo's record was officially cleared, and his good name was entirely restituted. Any charges and further investigations into fraud, forgery, drug trafficking, and corruption were dropped. He retired from politics in 1995 and died on January 9, 2001, never facing any justice for any of the crimes committed against the children of Belgium. Then we have Michel Nahul. Arrested on August 15, 1996, Phillle Nehoul was one of the 4 defendants in the Pedooo case, dubbed the Belgian pedophile scandal in the press. We've talked about this before many times. 4 murdered girls and 2 survivors were referred to by the New York Times as the victims of a deadly pornography ring. In the fall of 1996, several survivors of the network approached investigators of the Pedooo case, testifying anonymously under the codename X. Phillle Nehoul featured prominently in all of the victims' testimonies. The testimony of X1, Regina Louf, stood out because of her extremely precise, detailed descriptions of predator network activity in the 1980s. Investigators linked Regina Louf's testimony to several unsolved child murders that involved Phillle Nehoul. It's interesting. It's almost like Anneke Lucas was involved in the same ring as Regina Louf. In October 1996, the magistrate in charge of the Pedooo case, who eagerly promised the public to get to the bottom of this, was fired from the case, which caused protests around the country. In fact, these protests that protested government corruption and collusion in a pedophile ring, there was over 300,000 people on the streets to protest this, and Belgium is a very small country. So it was like, I believe, 20% or so of the entire country's population for one protest. Soon afterwards, X1/Regina Louf's investigators were put on leave and remained so even after the complaint triggering their dismissal was found to be unsubstantiated. So those investigators were unnecessarily removed from the case. Wonder why. On January 27, 1997, it was decided that they would reopen the investigation into the unsolved murder of a woman named Christine van Hees, which regained attention due to the testimony of Regina Louf. On February 13, 1984, 16-year-old Christine van Hees was repeatedly raped, tortured, and then set on fire. The original murder file already contained leads that led to Phillle Nehoul and Marc Dutroux. These leads were neglected, and yet the same examining magistrate who handled the case from 1985 onwards was placed in charge of the reinvestigation. It should have been known by the Belgian judiciary that this magistrate's sister was the godmother to the son of Phillle Nehoul, and that he furthermore had once acted as a lawyer for Phillle Nehoul's longtime girlfriend. Moreover, this magistrate thanked his appointment to the extreme right-wing political milieu of Phillle Nehoul and his friends, which his investigation should have scrutinized. In 1998, the Van Hees murder file was once again closed. The other unsolved child murders brought back into focus by Regina Louf's testimony were left untouched, and by then, the statute of limitations had run out on all of these cases. On October 22, 2001, a file named Dutroux Bis was officially split off from the Dutroux case. The Dutroux BIS file contained all the X testimonies of victims, as well as thousands of hairs and trace evidence which did not belong to any of the victims or defendants that were found in Marc Dutroux's car and torture dungeons. On March 19, 2001, Newsweek magazine published an article titled "Justice Delayed in Belgium." 3 years later, on March 1, 2004, 8 years after the bodies of 4 murdered girls were found, the Dutroux case went to trial. Because of the notoriety of the case, the trial was moved to the city of Arlen, where the public and thousands of journalists who could not fit into the courtroom could follow the trial on large video screens. In April 2004, the Belgian journalist Douglas de Koninck published a book titled 30 Witnesses Dead, Those Who Won't Testify at the Dutroux Trial, tracing in great detail the activities of 30 people who were either about to reveal something big or to deliver important testimony in the Dutroux case, who were then murdered, inexplicably ended their own lives, or died in suspicious accidents. On June 17, 2004, the Dutroux trial concluded. The lawyer of one of the surviving victims stated, "3/4 of the questions we had at the trial were answered with, 'We don't know, but we're going to investigate this in the Dutroux BIS file.'" Phillle Nehoul was found guilty of the minor charges of peddling false documents, dealing drugs, and trading in stolen vehicles. That was it. He was never convicted of being the head of a sadistic murder and pedophile torture network across the country. Even though the majority of the jury thought that Phillle Nehoul was guilty and complicit in the kidnappings of Dutroux's young victims, the judge ruled that Phillle Nehoul wasn't guilty of those charges. Phillle received a 5-year sentence for drug dealing and gang formation and was granted early release less than 2 years later in April 2006. On November 26, 2004, months after the trial, Marc Dutroux's file was officially closed, without another trial and without any new information being released to the public. Anneke mentions in her memoir that it's worth noting that she never came across Marc Dutroux, who was only 7 years older than her, in her time that she spent in the Predator network. For his part, Phillle Nehoul published a book titled Rumors, Facts, to clear his name, and enjoyed minor celebrity status for the remainder of his life. He joked that he was a WC, an acronym for Wallen Kanu, known as Walloon. But WC is also the acronym for water closet, the commonly used term for toilet. Anneke recalled the weeks after her rescue from the network as being difficult. Her mother was mad that they had lost their main source of income, Anneke's work at the network, and she continued to control and silence her. After one strangulation attempt and one final trip to the network, Anneke's mother gained control over Anneke by sexually assaulting her herself. And so, Anneke was done, and she ran away. Anneke spoke of this visit in an interview she did in 2019, saying, quote, "One late morning, she drove me to the castle. I was ushered in by a woman who ordered me to undress and decorated my body with one long black satin ribbon. She showed me the door, through where a group of 5 aristocratic men were gathered around a table after a hunt, drinking coffee. I recognized one aristocrat from the network whom I had nicknamed the Fox over his red hair and small pointy nose. Once I had overheard him asking for me to Phillle, who had replied that he wanted to keep the pretty ones a bit longer. This is how I learned that children did not make it through the night with the Fox. The Fox mentioned to the group of hunters in the kitchen that I was not meant to be used anymore, that my mother could not help herself and had brought me free of charge. One of the other hunters decided that my mother was trying to get them to do her dirty laundry, and he left with 2 others. The Fox and his friend remained. I was brutally raped by the friend, while the Fox aimed his hunting rifle at my head, rocking back and forth. He shot and missed. Upon hearing the deafening bang, his friend threw me down, angry at the interruption. He suggested that the Fox better kill me off, that I'd be better off dead. The Fox indicated that he did not care enough, and they left me lying on the floor. My mother was waiting in her car outside, parked on the side of the castle. Once I had changed back into my clothes and reached the small side door, which was open, I observed my mother sitting in her car, staring blankly, as though she were in shock. The woman who had been at the door when I entered was gone. There was no one in sight. On the hallway wall hung a collection of hunting rifles. I picked one up, aimed it at my mother's head, and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. I picked up another gun and aimed again. Again, nothing. There were no cartridges to be found, so I went out, got in the car, throwing myself in the back seat to lie down because I was in too much pain to sit. My mother drove me back home. Having survived that last time, I knew it was over afterwards. My mother would not be able to sell me anymore." End quote. After her escape from her mother in the ring, Anneke finally managed to make it through elementary school, but she had to repeat 8th grade twice. By the age of 15, she quit school and stayed with people she met in bars and cafes, preparing to leave home as per Patrick's repressed but active instructions. At 16, she ended up in the red light district of Antwerp, where the owner recruited her and her companions to dare to have drinks with the customers. She then moved in with a man twice her age, who, 3 weeks later, bullied her into a sexual relationship. But after, he helped her find a steady job, and she then left him and moved into her own apartment. In February of 1982, Anneke met her biological father, who coerced her into sex, aka her. 3 months later, Anneke left Belgium and moved to London, then to Paris, then to New York. In an interview with Real Women, Real Stories, Anneke spoke about this pattern that she was engulfed in long after leaving the network.
As a young adult, though I didn't have any scars, I had been projected upon so much as a sexual object that I attracted men. And part of me needed that to live, because that was the only way I knew how to feel good. And as a young woman, I was so disrespected and so used. And yet everyone was so ready to put the blame with me for being promiscuous, for being, as was said, cheap, a whore, all these things, all these epithets, so quick to denounce me. And then as I was healing, I realized, no, I have to break out of this pattern that I'm in, that I need sexual attention. So let me break away from it. Let me not objectify myself at all. Let me become a liberated woman.
And so, in 1987, Anneke moved to LA, where she finally started her healing process with therapy. But it wasn't without challenges. In the later 1980s, walking down Skid Row, a faint whiff of human feces gave Anneke a flashback to the S&M show to which she had been subjected during her first time in the network. From that time onward, she was often plagued with traumatic flashbacks, accompanied by very real searches for her predators online.
just knowing who that person was and seeing pictures of this person, seeing this person on a video, made the memory that I had of the incident so vivid and real. And I had to deal once more with the reality of that rape. So I was 10 years old.
In the ensuing years, Anneke saw many different therapists who helped her with memories of incest, sexual assault, and satanic ritual abuse. In 1988, Anneke saw a psychic who spoke of Patrick, saying, "He was a young man, and you were a child. He wants you to know that he did betray you. He can see that now. But, you know, the flesh is weak." In 1991, Anneke was accepted into a Master of Fine Arts program for screenwriting, where she met her future husband, who matched the profile Patrick had outlined in her rescue in 1974. In May of 1993, she dreamed about the North Sea in Belgium, of the times she had walked on the beach with Patrick Hamers, and she had a powerful sense that she was looking at his actualized self. She woke up with a certainty that the most powerful person in her life had died, but she did not know who this person was or what that meant. She told her therapist, but she was dismissive, and she decided then and there that she needed to look for someone new. Patrick Hamers died on May 14th, 1993. In 1994, Anneke saw a large poster of a face on a book that looked strongly familiar, the teacher of her near-death experience, and it was the cover for Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. She began meditation after reading this book, and it would become the most important thing for her recovery. In 1996, the Pedooo case offered a glimpse into the possibility of her memories being real, and it wasn't until she moved back to New York City in 1997 that she found a therapist who was new to satanic ritual abuse, but not blind to it. In an article by Global Citizen, Anneke shared that Michel Nahul, the man who nearly tortured her to death, became a defendant in the Pedooo case, and it was believed that it would blow up the Belgian pedophile network. But instead, 8 years later, only Pedooo received a life sentence. Michel was only convicted of fraud and forgery. Only then did Anneke really start her healing journey, but not without challenges or with a sense of validity and an ability to bring the light in. So, did Anneke's accounts really happen? There are some who believe that Anneke Lucas's story isn't credible, and we say this lightly, not disregarding an account of a person's sexual trauma. This is just informative, not to support an opinion of this podcast. I fully believe Anneke. And there's a lot that we could get into here, but this is already a really long podcast, so there's a lot of people out there who don't believe Anneke Lucas, and they want to shoot her down. They want to tell her that she's crazy, that this never happened, that she made up these stories. I've studied so much of these rings, and I believe Anneke. I believe this is a horrific, horrific thing, and this is very real. You can't have all these people coming out and saying this stuff was happening if it didn't happen. But now to our conclusion. In the interview with the Flemish language station VTM, serial killer Mark Dutroux admitted that he had been part of a wider Belgian predator network, but he said that the justice system just didn't want to pursue it. There is a well-grounded predator ring, Mark said. I maintained regular contact with people in this ring. However, the law does not want to investigate this lead. This was supposedly the same network that Anneke was a part of, but unfortunately, I was unable to find any more information regarding the dismissal of the lead that Dutroux presented of the network to the police. It really does seem, as we've talked about with Dutroux many times now, that no one wanted to look into this. In her book, Quest for Love, Anneke related this information as well, stating that, quote, in 1996, Mark Dutroux told the press he was a small cog in a giant wheel and alluded to his protection by highly placed government officials. The New York Times reported about the deadly pornography ring. It appeared as though the entire world was about to learn all about the network into which I had been sold as a child. I learned about the Dutroux case in a New York Times article when the chief investigator who had promised the distraught public to get to the bottom of this was fired for partiality because he had eaten a plate of spaghetti at a fundraiser for victims. This sincere judge's dismissal sent more than 300,000 people into the streets of Belgium in what was termed the White Marches, protesting government corruption in the wake of the child murders. Then in 2004, 8 years after Dutroux was apprehended, when the case went to trial, the network had been forgotten about by international media. Previous reports about a larger network were ignored, and the single perpetrator theory was widely embraced. In an interview with Kai Krutzfeld, Anneke shared that she decided to share her story first in 2013, to face the inevitable attacks on her person, and went public with her story. She didn't seek the press, but instead answered a question from a journalist interviewing her about her work in prisons. In 2017, Anneke did a TEDx talk in Klagenfurt, in which she spoke about her life in the elite predator network and what she learned during her extensive trauma. In 2022, Anneke Lucas published her memoir, Quest for Love, Memoir of a Slave. Much of our information presented today can be attributed to this book. Anneke shared in an interview with The Courage to Change in 2023 that she went on to found a group for trafficked women.
I started a group for trafficked women. Well, a lot of those women, and the reason I started that particular program was together with the Department of Health, in fact, was that the women were caught, they were picked up by the police, and then they were jailed. But they were only picked up because they were refusing to name their traffickers, really, or their pimps. So the Department of Health was saying that obviously they don't trust doctors, they don't trust most people. So I started a program with those women to help them get out of the system altogether, because most of them, there was not a single woman there that was just a sex worker because she wanted to do that. They were all as children. So many had started to be trafficked right from the foster system. So they were all trafficking victims.
Anneke continues to do work in this manner to this day, advocating for vulnerable populations.
Children are the most vulnerable of our population. We want to create a society where children will be safe, where children will have a community around them. Every child deserves safety. No child deserves what I went through and what millions of children each day go through. But unfortunately, the way the system is right now, that is part of the system. As women, we have so much potential to be truly empowered by feeling into everything that we as women endure. That gives us more strength than anyone. All that pain, behind all that powerlessness and that humiliation, really feeling into what was done to me, really understanding that it wasn't me, that at the end of the day, I'm okay. I was a child. I was being victimized. It wasn't my fault.
We'll leave you with a quote from the introduction of Anneke's memoir. Quote, "Elite pedophilia is the world's best protected secret, and it makes sense because the perpetrators need to ensure that you, the reader, will never focus on them. They prefer that we all keep busy with the many distractions they throw at us to keep us divided. Dysfunctional siblings of the global family, with psychopaths and narcissists for parents. We should do anything but look to the source of Western society's ills, which is the utter selfishness of the leadership, so extreme that it's an emotional disease, of which symptoms such as heartlessness and superiority turn its hosts into monsters. Those who do what it takes to belong to the power establishment are the most lost, the most emotionally infantile, the most broken, and the most evil among us. They do not deserve our trust, our confidence, our acceptance of their political savvy and expertise, or our admiration for their power or wealth. It is all smoke and mirrors. If we can absorb the reality that many of the most rich and famous rape and kill children with impunity, how can we possibly continue arguing and vilifying each other over differences of opinion?" Holy shit, guys. That was an incredibly long episode. You can find Anneke Lucas on social media. I would highly recommend supporting her by buying a copy of her book, which is absolutely incredible. It's such a sad, empowering, disturbing, horrific read if you want to continue with Anneke's story. Anneke, if you're out there watching this, I really hope that I've done your story justice. I'd love to talk to you and do an interview with you one day, because I'm here to help and I'm here to do whatever I can to blast this information out into the world. To everybody who has been watching, I don't know if it's afternoon, evening, morning, this is so long that you probably started listening in the morning and it's now like midnight. But thank you to everybody who supports the work on this channel. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Comments and likes help boost the interaction and how YouTube pushes this stuff out. And yeah, thank you guys so much. We will be back next week with another story. As always, stay suspicious, keep that tinfoil hat on, and I'll catch you next week.